All right, and here we go. Welcome, everybody. This live is intended to correct some things that I currently or recently saw on another YouTube channel. Uh, I'm not trying to bash this guy, anyways. I just don't understand where he got his opinion from, and the fact that the facts that he was trying to bring up are not facts at all. And Jeff actually brought this to my attention first. So, Jeff, if you want to put your 2 cents in real quick.
Well, the first thing I have to say is that his video has a much cooler intro than you have. So I think we have some work to do. And he's got 50,000 subscribers. So I would hope that some of them would take the time to search around and actually pursue what other people consider the facts. I mean, there are plenty of conspiracy theories going around, and I would not dispute that fact. But I think we can get down to brass tacks and some of the things that he cited as sort of his fundamental facts, the number one fact that he has. I think we can readily dispute and sort of knock that out. And when the first domino starts to fall, then the rest of them start to fall. And that's how I came to this case, because there's just some things that fundamentally don't make sense. There's evidence, and then there's lack of evidence, right? There's because of the things that are there should be other things there that are just not there, and you put that together, and that's what clouds the big picture, and for me creates minimally a reasonable doubt, which is where I think his innocence lies. And I think we can go through at least a couple of those tonight, and really at least push that first domino over, and let the rest of them fall. But my opinion on that, he's a very credible guy. He's obviously got a lot of experience in this. He's a man to be taken seriously. I think he has great instincts, because I think his instincts point to two things, two critical pieces of lacking evidence, which if they were there, I would believe that Stephen was guilty. You're never going to convince me of Brendan. But because of the lack of these things being present, I just can't be convinced that Steve is guilty. So with that said, I'm hogging the floor, and Mark only has limited time. So
no problem. Thanks, Jeff. Oh, look, I forgive me. I think the gentleman's name's Ken Main. Is that right? Is that what he's called? So just like with Jeff, he's obviously a YouTuber. He's clearly successful with 50,000 subscribers. And very much so. That's the motivation, when you're in at that level. But I was disappointed with what I saw, and it started right from the beginning, because you do want someone. He's an ex-detective, we're told. So I found his presentation extremely flawed, factually extremely flawed, and his willingness to be dismissive of things that are so powerful in this case. For example, quite early on in his discussion, he talked about the noise around the things. He was going to focus on a couple of things, and he talked about conflicts of interest being a noise, right? I don't know how conflicts of interest can be a noise in a case like this. But I won't go into the micro just a moment. We're obviously going to come to that. But, I'm not here to bag him either. Congratulations to him. He has run a successful YouTube video channel. But I just feel that when you're dealing with something as important as this, that he's really done himself and his channel a disservice by, one, only really having a superficial look at this matter in truth. And even when he did that, it was factually very poorly structured. He got really big things incorrect. And I don't really kind of blame him too much, because he clearly doesn't know about the case like we do. And I would have thought a more professional approach to such a complex set of circumstances was to invite some true experts on to discuss it with him, and let him interact with them about the factual side of things, rather than just sit back and give the impression that he had it all in hand and he knew exactly what went on here. So So in criticising it, it's a constructive criticism. I just thought the outcome of what he had to say was not based in anything that others should rely on. So that's my opening foray.
Well,
Well, I think that's well said, Mark. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head.
the one problem I had off the get-go is like him saying that law enforcement has nothing to worry about as far as the lawsuit. It was the county's problem. That's not true. Dennis
That's not
Vogel
true.
and Kasurk were both being held reliable for what took place.
They were being individually sued. That's correct.
That's correct. And the insurance company that would normally protect or provide backup to these circumstances had decided to step away because of the behaviour. So they were personally really going to be on the line in this case, because the insurance company wasn't going to back them up, at least to the extent of this claim. So
Yeah, there's a lot of those factual mistakes in there, and I wonder how many of them really helped him form the conclusion that he came to, starting with 1985, which we'll get into, where he comes to the conclusion, and I think it's kind of a justice system / law enforcement bias that he claims he could possibly have. I mean, I'll give the man the credit that he says I might be biased. I try hard not to talk about this bias or to account for this bias, but it might be that I have this bias, and I do think he does have that, and I think we can get into that. My place that I'd like to start here, though, if that would be okay, would be to start with his number one fact. What is the number one fact that he says is the thing that convinces him that Stephen is guilty? And you'll be able to find that, Millbilly, at 55 minutes into his video. If you want to play just a minute or so of that, where he said it was what his number one fact is that convinces him. 55 minutes. 55. 5-5.
while Millbilly's looking at that, Jeff, one of the things that I know, this is really picky, and I'm not trying to be critical of him, because I just see that he's trying to do broadcasts what really are superficial broadcasts on a lot of cases, and he doesn't have the time to go deep diving, contrary to the title of his video. But when I see him pronounce Brendan's name as Brendan Darcy, I mean, that's only trivial stuff, but seriously, how do you not get that right? And it sort of demonstrates a lack of respect for what's going on here,
Sometimes he's Brendan, sometimes he's Brandon.
He says the guy that found the key was a guy named Mark.
Something.
But here
Not
we go.
Mark Hodnott.
In buckets. Then her and her daughter drove down the road, reaching in those buckets and dispersing the ashes. Now I went and met with the daughter, the other
Who's got the
daughter
background noise?
of that Netflix
I have people in the background,
show,
I can mute, but Millbilly's
and she told me how her sister, who ended up going missing and is presumed killed by her mother, how the ashes and the bones were still hot, and it would burn her hands when she was throwing it out the window. This is what happened here. The body was placed, tires which burn hot, and
No, he's talking about the body being burned, but he never brings up the smell.
That's exactly where we're going with this. Is that he first of all he says his number one issue, which I think maybe your timestamp isn't quite aligning with the YouTube timestamp, is that it's how could you find Teresa's bones, literally feet from his backyard, and how could he not be part of that? It goes into some diatribe about as he went to sleep and somebody else lit the bonfire, but he never said anything like that. That's completely absurd. And then he goes into how James Cameron, the famous director of the Titanic, I think, said
yes,
that
correct.
Ed Edwards, the serial killer, blew up Teresa and burnt her bones, which is equally ludicrous. But then that thing that you were saying was a story that he was talking about with regard to a particular Netflix series where a body is burned and the cremations are moved, which he's just saying is ludicrous to expect to have happened. So he completely annihilates his own narrative by saying that how could cremations end up somewhere else? Well, then you just went into a story about how cremations got moved to deflect the fact that they got burned in the spot that they did. What are you talking about? This is exactly what happened. And then right after that, if you guys want to forward, if you were to forward to, I think it's an hour and 7 minutes, which I think our timestamps are a little off. He gets into talking about the smell. Stephen Avery, how could he open the door and smell that smell of burning flesh? Well, the Avery residence that night was, Halloween was more like Grand Central Station than it was like this isolated spot. Let's go through all the people who are there, right? Supposedly Brendan's there when all this killing is going on. Why didn't Len Kaczynski ask Brendan about how bad it smelled? If he, that I knew a kid in high school went on to be a firefighter. He said that is a smell that stays with you. You never forget that smell if you smell it. The smell of burning, the smell of the flesh being burned in a fire. It's awful, especially if you know what it is. It's just something that you just can't forget. Why didn't Brendan say anything about that? And the bloodhound Robert Fabian, who was able to smell the smell of burning plastic when Stephen supposedly dropped the electronics into his burn barrel. Oh, by the way, there was no bones found in that burn barrel. That's another thing he gets wrong. But aside from that, Robert Fabian and Earl Avery, who were there in a golf cart, don't report the smell of burning flesh. Scott Tadich pulls up to get Barb, right? Barb must have come out of the house to be able to get into the car. That's not that far. That's less than 50 feet from that.
There's like we're reading the reports I read, the story changes because first it says that he pulled up and this might be when he picked her up. She was already outside with Steven with one of the boys. And when he dropped her off,
you couldn't tell which one.
Yeah, but when he picked her up, Ryan was home, Elaine was home, Brendan was home, Steven was there, Bobby was nowhere in sight. Ryan leaves for work at 7:30. Elaine leaves around 5:30. Only person left on the property is Brendan.
The essence of this point is that the reporting by Mr. Main of this matter is just so far from the documented evidence of what happened, irrespective of an opinion, that it just makes it embarrassing that he could follow down that path as a detective and as a hopeful professional YouTube analyst.
I mean, I think amplifying that point, Mark, is he says that is his number one point. Right. That is where he starts. That is the point that puts him over the edge that Stephen is guilty because those bones were found steps away. He says, if you think that they got there by any other way but Stephen burning her in that burn pit, you need to have your head examined. And he uses those exact words. And that's right. And that's right before right before he goes into this other story where somebody else moves cremains to deflect
yes,
guilt
exactly.
So I just don't see the credibility, and importantly, this evidence that we're talking about that should be there, right? And unless there's a conspiracy on on law enforcement side, people should have smelled that because burning flesh stinks to high heaven. But nobody reported it, even unfavorable witnesses like Earl Avery and Bob Fabian.
Yeah.
So it should be there.
But as we know, they found bones in the bottom of the Dassey burn barrel as well. So if you take Mr. Main's theory, was he saying that Teresa was burned there behind Steve's garage, and then they scooped a bunch of them up into the Dassey burn barrel, but left the rest, or the a good chunk of them still there. I mean, it's fanciful stuff, and it's embarrassing because I was hoping, you listen to someone like him, which I'm sure he's got lots of skill and experience, but he just undermined all that by the lack of understanding of what actually went on in the case. But not just our opinion about our feelings about guilt or innocent, by the documented evidence. If he bothered if he bothered to actually read what is not in dispute, right? He would realise he couldn't come to the conclusions that he came to. He can't come to those conclusions, right? So, but I say that not to be excessively critical, even though I guess I am. It's because he's doing I think, as best I can tell, a weekly YouTube thing, right?
Right.
And so the amount of time he would have to really go into the case to really understand it well is minimal, and he would be better served, as I said, in a complex case, by inviting relevant people in to talk about it and flesh out the details, and he can act as a what do you call it, a moderator to the discussion and bring in his professional police views about things.
I think his instincts are good, right? I
do too.
The fact that
I think
talks
they are.
about the odor of a burning body is something that you hardly ever hear the guilters talk about, because that is, in my mind, exculpatory evidence towards Stephen, and the fact that the burn pit in his backyard is unlikely to be the primary burn site. The only person in the whole case who reports a foul smell is Travis Grohl, who's Josh Verdant's employee. And he reports it on the 1st of November, right? Not or was it the 2nd? I think the 1st of November, in the vicinity of the Manitowoc of the gravel. So
if anything would align to the view that the body got burnt down there.
For sure elsewhere, right? I mean, how hard is it to bring a bucket of cremains over to the Avery burn pit?
Well, there's a newspaper article that states that they found buckets on the property that were used to transport the bones. Well, I have audio from Calumet where they're requesting buckets to be brought to the property.
Yeah. Oh, really? Yeah. Well,
not provided to Dean and Jerry, but.
Yeah.
And there's over 18 buckets. We have photos of every bucket, too. Well, I've been using the case photos. It's a shame that we have all these photos and the photos that they use for trial.
My view about this, I mean, if I can just slightly step away from the YouTube thing, is that Teresa met her fate on Cuss Road. She was temporarily left there. And while the car was taken care of, and later come back and got and dismembered and burned in various burn barrels down in the Manitowoc gravel pit. That's my view. And then her remains, in part, were scattered on Stephen's pile there, just in an attempt to implicate him.
And not even that many of them. Right?
No, that's right. And then all the behaviours around that afterwards, no photo evidence of the bones in situ and all the normal, number one professional things you do as a police force when you find remains. None of that happening because they weren't in a situ. They were dumped there. So, but anyway, that's just an opinion based on all the facts. But I think I have some credibility to have an opinion based on 4 or 5 years of looking at this matter. So
I'd say so, Mark.
So and then just to go back to Ken Main's thing again, I just think he needs to choose his cases carefully. I mean, if I was listening to one of his other cases and knew nothing about it, I would just go, oh, that sounds interesting. That you come to a conclusion. But when you know the case and you hear someone summarizing it like he did, or not even that, coming to some definitive conclusion, that's a bit scary, really. And I don't think it does his credibility very good by doing that. So
no, it does not.
Well, my understanding is his viewers recommended this case to him, but my opinion is he should have done a lot more research.
Yeah, he should, absolutely.
Yeah, the amount that's required to really understand the twists and turns in this case. If you just, I mean, the documentary is what, 20 hours long, and that doesn't even really scratch the surface of some of the details that have been uncovered by, the many great researchers who have touched this case, for the past, since man one, right? There's been a ton of them. See my dog come in. So yeah, I mean, it is hard to cut through the conspiracy to the brass tacks. I tend to believe the audio of the case, and every now and then you can find something. I very much trust people like Dr. Silkman. And one of the things that he talks about, for example, is he admits that there is no blood spatter evidence found in the garage. Well, now Brendan, in Brendan's quote unquote confession, Brendan says that she was shot 5 times. I thought Brendan said she was shot 10 to 15 times. Where is the blood spatter in the garage? Where is it?
That's my problem. He's making things up that didn't even happen, and
yeah. So I think that you have to, like I said, it's the stuff that's almost the stuff that's not there that's important. That's the stuff that is there. It's only after a long period of research, Mark, which amplifies your point that you should probably be bringing in experts. That's not the kind of show he does, and maybe
no, that's right.
Maybe he's as a YouTuber, fishing for clicks is not a bad thing. He knows this case has quite a following. You can look on the various very successful YouTubers, from our good friend the late Eric Cozy. People who have hundreds of thousands of views on their channel. You can, of course, Millbilly too. You can see why this case was a good. My wife's on TV. She's not going to like that. Just the amount of research that's required to really get a feeling for what is really the facts here. I think
one of the things that was surprising to me is that how he came up with stuff. What he came up with, he just came up with. He made stuff up. I'm not saying deliberately. He said things that were just patently untrue.
Well, the fact that he had to think about what he was going to say before he said it is a huge red flag.
Yeah.
Like the fingernails, for example, is a good example of that, right? So,
that's the thing.
Exactly.
They did test fingernails in the 85 case, but there was no DNA found. The DNA that was found on the blanket, and it was a pubic hair, not fingernail scraping.
My recollection is that that there was DNA found in the fingernails, and it was exculpatory to Stephen, but the judge said that, am I to believe that Petty didn't accidentally make contact with one of the medical people, and the fact that there was this DNA that doesn't implicate Stephen under fingernails, is that enough to say that Stephen wasn't the rapist? And that the answer to that was no, and they sent him back. So so that's my recollection of how it happened. So that was like a double screw job. So that Stephen got, and then it was years after that DNA advanced enough to test the pubic hair that was found on the blanket.
Yeah. He also made some comments about allegedly what Kayla Avery had told the people at school. Right.
Yeah, I was wrong.
I mean, I think, how do you go from the truth and the evidence on that to this fanciful story about Brendan told Kayla that he saw...
How do you go from Stephen Avery's trial and then add stuff that happened in Brendan's?
Yeah.
So... Yeah, my recollection on that, Mark, you correct me if I'm wrong, is that, the boys were kind of busting on her. I'm not sure which ones. But we're telling her that when it rained, that blood would seep up through the garage floor.
Yeah.
And that kind of creeped her out.
Yeah.
I have a little sister too, and that is the kind of thing that a rude older brother would say to terrorize.
Absolutely. Yeah. So.
But yeah.
Someone just made a comment about the victimology. That's the problem. There was no victimology. The law enforcement did piss poor job. They got all their information was obtained from her friends and family on the 3rd. So, what police work did they really do?
None.
Yeah,
you can take this back to that really famous piece of recording on, I forget what it was, in the first week anyway, before they found the car, when the dispatcher says, or whoever it said, have we got Stephen Avery in custody yet, right? That famous piece of...
Oh, that's Dennis Jacobs, 209, worked for Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department. That's happened on the morning of the 5th when the car is found. Do we have Stephen Avery in custody? Do we have a body yet?
Yeah. And so that tells you, in that simple statement, tells you a whole lot. And it tells you they had a mission to get Stephen Avery. And that's all they focused on. That's all they were concerned about. There were undoubtedly tangential law enforcement people who are off around the fringes doing their law enforcement job because they weren't in the inner circle and they didn't know what was really going on here. But they had Stephen in their sights. Everything that they did was had led from, I'd say, from Tuesday probably, the 1st of November, till every day thereafter led to nailing this to Stephen Avery. That's the way it went. We see that in the lack of investigation. We see a lack of the conflicts of interest with Manitowoc being involved in the investigation forever. All those things all pointed towards, let's get Stephen Avery, and all the evidence, that any meaningful evidence that came up was all evidence that had serious doubt about it. I mean, how do you end up with a key that only has Stephen's DNA on it, a pristine key? How do you end up with that?
And no other keys.
Let's talk about
no other keys.
The evidence that was found by Manitowoc, the key, the license plate, and the bones were all found by Manitowoc officers.
And the cell phone, camera, PDF.
Right. And what else was found on the Avery property besides that was of value to the explanation, to the investigation?
Exactly.
No. So he talks about what would happen if the Manitowoc wasn't there. Well, they wouldn't have found any evidence, right? Because somehow it was only Coburn that managed to find it, according to the documentary on the 7th search. I understand there might be some dispute about whether it was actually the 7th or maybe it was only the 6th.
That makes a big difference, doesn't it?
It makes a big difference, right? So that's it. And the license plate, we can't forget, was found by they did a good job of covering their tracks, right? Coburn found the key, but he attributed it to what's the guy's name? The Calumet guy who was there with Kaczynski.
No. What's his name? Kucharski.
809.
Yeah.
Right, and then the license plate was found by a firefighter, but Coburn said, I saw a glint of light in that car, and then the firefighter searches it, finds the license plate.
Oh, and just another thing I noticed in the
because he got
evidence
the
photos.
Cliff's notes.
There's a Mountain Dew can sitting outside that car too.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Well,
Jamie,
you got a
what are your
question here
thoughts?
from T1 You got a question here from T1 quick. What is it that we fear the most here? This is not the first time that we've heard incorrect facts, so I doubt that's it. So is it that this person has mass influence? He's talking about the YouTuber.
Oh.
Well, I wouldn't call it fear, T1. I would call it, we came into this forum, and I think we were very respectful of his background, of his investigatory capability, and I think he just came to some wrong conclusions. Starting with that very first domino that we talked about, which was his number one thing is the bones. I think we've kind of adequately disputed the fact that it stinks to high heaven if you burn a body, and there were a lot of people there and nobody reported the smell. If you can dispute that, then the dominoes fall from there. If that's his number one thing, you got to go on to his number two thing after that. I think I would love to hear him explain why nobody reported that smell. Why didn't anybody ask Brendan how bad it smelled? Where is the blood spatter in the garage? So I think this guy might yet be convincible. If he were to hear what we understand as the evidence, and if we could correct some of the things, and I'd like to start with 1985 when I talked to him, because that he wasn't targeted. I'm waiting to go into a long discussion of 1985. Yeah, let's so I mean, that's play with Greaseback, but that's my thing. I would love to be able to sit with him face to face and have a discussion with him, because if you think 1985 was just an accident and it was all about Penny, and you think that you kind of forget about the smell, forget about the blood, then I can see how maybe he's right in his assertion that if you get past the planting assertion that Stephen Avery's guilty, you can't Stephen Avery cannot be innocent without evidence being planted simply because of his own blood in the rap, right? You have to have evidence have to be planted for him to be
Oh,
guilty, or
and
else
for him to say that the cops would never do that, you got to know the backstory of what took place.
correct.
Yeah.
So what did Greaseback have to say?
So to answer, from my point of view, answer T1's question, or the question he's got from the listeners, is that there isn't any fear. I mean, we're just a bunch of caring professional people who are trying to get the truth here. We just want to make sure that people don't get misled about the facts of this matter. That's all we're trying to do here. It's not so much a criticism of Ken Main. It's just to say, hey, if you're going to tell this story, tell it well, and if you don't know it well, ask some others to assist you. So that's all we're saying. So
Here goes the Greaseback. When he had
can I just
go ahead.
Millbilly, I must apologise. I have to duck away, so if you don't mind, I might just leave the chat at this stage. Is that all right?
Could you, before you leave, could you at least tease what you told us before the video started?
Oh, right. Okay. So I spoke to Stephen about 2 hours ago, and we recorded a conversation about his views about what happened late last year with the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court of Wisconsin, and his perspective on what's going on in 2022. So it's a short discussion. Stephen's very open in what he tells you, and I'll have that ready, and I'll pass it on, and you'll be able to hear it on Millbilly's channel, certainly within the next 24 hours at the latest. So, yeah.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, and he sends his best to everyone, by the way. He always does that. It's just always does that.
Give him our best.
Yeah.
We're doing what we can.
All right. So thanks, guys, and continue the chat, and we'll talk again soon.
Have a good one, Mark. Good to see you.
All the best, T1. Take care, Millbilly and Jeff.
But here's what Greaseback has to say about the 1985 case.
Complicated story, so I'll try to keep it simple, Melvin, but thank you. I call it in the book a 20-year crime saga, because that's really what the Stephen Avery story is. Before I get into it right away, I'm going to throw out there that I think there's basically 3 types of wrongful convictions in a real broad brush. Some are, they happen by mistake. They're what I'd call innocent wrongful convictions. Sounds funny, but I'm talking about the government action as being innocent, mistaken. Say it's a mistaken identification, something that the prosecutor and the police really didn't get, and they believed with all their heart that the person they were charging and arguing guilt for a trial was guilty. That would be what we hope to be most of them. Those happen. The next of the 3 types, I would say, are 3 different stripes that wrongful convictions come in. I think involve maybe overzealousness by the part of the state, whether it's the prosecutor or the police, or both. Usually it's both if there's overzealousness. And maybe that kind of example would be, let's say, a unreliable informant, jailhouse snitch we call them. And let's say the prosecutor and the police push the person. They still think that the person they're charging is guilty, but they're pushing it. They really have some doubts about the reliability of the informant themselves. Maybe there's a little bit of that exculpatory evidence that maybe not quite so exculpatory in their minds, kind of, it's in the eye of the beholder somewhat. So they don't release it. But in their hearts, they still think this guy's guilty. I'm going to do everything I can as an advocate for the people to see that justice be done. And in that case, they believe firmly that justice is that the person be convicted. Not good, if we let our advocacy, our zealousness sort of take over from our reason and our mercy might be too strong of a word, but are kind of those words that you cited earlier, that minister of justice part of what we're here for. But then there's the third type. And the third type goes beyond overzealousness. I think it's the kind of case that sort of shocks the conscience. Police, prosecutor misconduct. The number they throw out there, the Innocence Project, as cases that involve that, I think it's 47, something like that, percent of all wrongful convictions have a factor, not the factor, but a factor being governmental misconduct. Now, there's governmental misconduct and there's governmental misconduct. The Stephen Avery case, the one that happened in Wisconsin, in the very office where I'm now a prosecutor, is one that shocks the conscience. And that's why I wrote the book. Yes, what was my journey to writing the book? You're not supposed to use obscenities in this kind of setting. I was pissed off. Prosecutors always say that. But I was just very frustrated with what my former colleagues did. And before I make that kind of bald-faced statement, I just want to hit you with a few brief facts. I think we each get about 15 minutes. So I'll try to be quick. But the Avery story starts on June 29th, 1985. So it's coming up on 30 years ago, 35, something like that. And the assault, it began with his brutal, vicious
Wasn't it July?
assault of a woman jogging along the Lake Michigan shoreline in Wisconsin. It's about the only time you can jog along the Lake Michigan shoreline, late summer. It's cold. And anyhow, she was a YMCA physical fitness instructor, and one of her daily routines would be to run 3 miles up the lake shore and 3 miles back. And it's a very isolated stretch of beach on Lake Michigan, and there was a fella who was hiding basically behind a tree close to the shore and lunged at Penny. Penny, I can use her name. She's the victim. She was very helpful.
There's no trees close to the shore. He was up on the dune. He's not even getting his facts right either.
On the book that I wrote, and when she lunged at, she tried, of course, to escape. She angled off into the lake to avoid her attacker. She was afraid to jump in and swim because.
Not true either. She was seen running down the berm by individuals that were on the beach. They then placed a towel or blanket on her, and that's where the DNA pubic hair came from.
Thought he'd grab her and drown her and strangle her, but he did. He got her as she came back toward the shore, and he grabbed her and took her up the sand dunes, and he just brutally, viciously attacked her. She survived, which is amazing in its own right, but she was able to give an identification of her assailant. And this is where it starts to get, at first it looks like it's pretty much a mistaken kind of wrongful conviction, because the police took a statement from her. She gave the description of her assailant, and where it turns into sort of a bias situation
is when Judy Dvorak says, "Hey, that sounds like Stephen Avery."
That sounds like Stephen Avery.
And who's Judy Dvorak? His neighbor.
In a smaller community like where I come from, the county's only 70,000 people, so some of the folks know each other. The assailant in this case was a well-known, or the person who they thought was assailant was a well-known person among police. He had been involved in some other criminal activity. He was actually on bond at the time on bail for another offense. But the investigating officer almost immediately, based only on a very vague description of her assailant, thought that sounds like Stephen Avery. And unfortunately,
And Dennis Vogel prosecuted Gregory Allen.
Previously.
Yes, like.
And that case was found in the Avery file afterwards. I have a little snippet from Griesbach's book I'll read after this audio is done that talks about that too. But the bombshell is yet to come from this interview.
He lived right across the street. And further, Stephen Avery's uncle was a deputy sheriff's department. So the family sort of,
Harland.
this is a small community type thing, but the same sort of thing, if not knowing the.
The thing that bothers me the most, Stephen had 16 alibis that he brought into trial. He had the receipt saying he was at Shopco. He had employees at the Shopco testify in his behalf, stating that he was there, and they still prosecuted him and found him guilty. My question is, what did they do to this jury? Because if you look what happened in 2005, if Stephen had more money, he could have asked for a mistrial.
Yeah, they had these strange reenactments, but with regard to the video that we're talking about, when he said, "Oh, you know, they had an eyewitness. What are you going to do when you have an eyewitness? Just wait till you hear the bomb that Greaseback drops on that. That's coming up."
The same kind of biases, I think, are relevant to larger offices that might start the police looking the wrong way. We move on, though, to an identification process where we use the word unduly suggestive in the law. This went beyond unduly suggestive. The police had a mugshot of Stephen Avery brought up from his arrest prior to the case. And the folks who did...
And that photo was from the Sandra Morris incident.
The wrongful conviction lawsuit after the exoneration 18 years later are convinced that the mugshot of Stephen Avery was basically looked at by the police artist sketch, and then the artist sketch became the mugshot. So in a sense, they had their suspect working with the victim. They developed this artist sketch that looked, in the words of the trial court judge, had
I like how he says they. He should have said Jean Couché.
Uncanny resemblance with the mugshot. So already it looks like police are getting toward a situation where they know who it is and they're manipulating the evidence, kind of the opposite of what police and prosecutors are supposed to do. So it goes to trial, the case goes to trial, and despite 16 alibi witnesses and a time slip, a receipt from a Shopco, a department store in Green Bay, that showed it was virtually possible for Mr. Avery to have committed the crime, the jury convicted Mr. Avery.
Why? He's got solid proof proving that he couldn't have done this, and they still convicted him. Be curious to see who was on that jury.
And again, that sort of bias that even goes beyond the prosecutor, but to a community, started to take effect because Penny Burnson, the victim in this case, and her husband Tom were business people. She was an extremely articulate, wonderful woman. The prosecutor routinely went through the attack. It wasn't an issue of how brutal the attack was. The charge was attempted homicide, sexual assault, false imprisonment. So the need to sort of prove the crime wasn't there so much. It was who did it. But the whole trial basically was Penny's identification and over and over again kind of her recounting through witness statements to the police earlier and through her own statement to the jury, a reenactment with her husband of the crime. Very odd, in my opinion, how it came off. So that's the issue, in my opinion, about how we as prosecutors sometimes we can use sympathy, we can use emotion to some extent. That's valid, since we are advocates, but we can go overboard. And in this case, we went overboard. So far, no real misconduct. I started my comments with misconduct. And with prosecutorial or police misconduct. I don't think it's there yet, but soon this case developed into something where it was different. The police, Penny Burnson went to the police shortly after he was arrested, Mr. Avery, and there were several phone calls made to her late at night, which is often done by assailants when they know their victim, and she thought this was the assailant. Couldn't have been Mr. Avery, though, because he was locked in jail, awaiting trial on bail.
And Gregory Allen, that's what is his thing. He
He did that many times.
He'd
Yep.
stalk his victims after he got away.
No access to a phone at that point. Penny Burnson goes to the police, and she says, look, I think it might be somebody else. And worse, the police agency, the city police agency, a larger police agency, goes with Penny, a detective, to the sheriff and says, look, I think you really got the wrong guy. We've been tracking this other person, Gregory Allen, who matches the description much better. I think he's the guy that did it. The case goes on, it goes to trial. Staff in the district attorney's office actually go up to the DA.
So just in case that wasn't clear, Penny Bernstein went with the number 2 in the Manitowoc Police Department, not the sheriff's office, but the police department, to the sheriff, who's Kasurik, right? Kasurik later said he couldn't recall this, right? That's what he told, but he couldn't recall this. But Penny Bernstein herself went with the number 2 in the Manitowoc PD.
His name is Detective Bergner.
Just to say, I don't think it's him. Say, well, I had all these. So imagine what kind of pressure they put on this. And I'm not sure who they is. I doubt it was her husband. I have no doubt it was law enforcement that put this pressure on Penny to go through the charade at trial, where they went through this reenactment of what happened with her husband, which was, out of bounds in the first place. So if your conclusion from 1985 was that it was this eyewitness that carried all the weight, I got news for you. This eyewitness went to friggin' Kasurik and said, I don't think it's him. So if that's what you're resting your laurels on, I think you should find something else to rest your laurels on, because even Penny didn't think it was him, because she was getting phone calls from the guy who she really thought it was. And despite that, despite 16 eyewitnesses, they continued to do the prosecution anyway. And he was found guilty by a jury of 12 lemmings, who obviously did. I have some things, and that's pretty much it, I'd say, from that video. I think you can put a link to that video in the description. People can read the rest of it. I have a couple of quotes from Griesbach's book. Michael Griesbach was the assistant district attorney in Manitowoc County under Mark Rohr, who Rohr is actually the guy who asked for the investigation in the first place to see if there had been any misconduct. Interestingly, just as a quick aside, if you read Deb Strauss's deposition, they asked Deb Strauss, did you ever, and this is by Kelly, John Kelly, right? Stephen's attorney, asked Deb Strauss, did you ever extensively interview Mr. Rohr or Mr. Griesbach about what they had been told, and by whom who gave them this concern, right? This concern that might have been innocent. And Deb Strauss' answer to that was a flat out, as you'd expect, no. I didn't do that. And by the way, Deb Strauss was along with Amy Lehman, was the investigator assigned by the DCI to investigate the performance of the state on the Avery case. And you can tell Deb's intellectual curiosity, who later called up Manitowoc and said, "Oh yeah, Stephen Avery, I want to help investigate him." Did you ever bother to talk to Mike Griesbach about what he thought? No. So here's some other things from the book that Mike Griesbach wrote. He had a phone conversation with Dennis Vogel, who was actually who was a district attorney who prosecuted Stephen. And he said in this conversation, Griesbach quotes him, says, he said an analyst from the crime lab had testified at the trial, and his recollection was that her examination of some hairs, this is Sherry Culhane, right? Her investigation of some hairs had tied Avery to the crime. We know from that the FBI no longer uses that. That's been verified by forensic experts like Dr. Silkman himself. And Griesbach thinks to himself, yeah, right, Dennis Vogel, you're still relying on the science, quote unquote science, of hair examination, which has since been debunked. Then almost mechanically, Vogel asked me a question I'll never forget. This is what you talked about, Millbill. Is there anything on Allen in the file? And this is Griesbach thinking to himself, I hung up the phone and just sat there in my office for a while, reflecting upon our conversation. Vogel's question, is there anything on Allen in the file, implied that he knew Allen and not Avery was the assailant, didn't it? He was covering his tracks. He must have thought it all along. How else could I take it? Despite their reputations, most attorneys possess as much integrity as the next person, and maybe even more. Dennis Vogel appeared to be one of the exceptions. How could he prosecute someone he knew was innocent? And how could he let somebody as dangerous as Gregory Allen go free? It goes on. It would also have been nearly impossible to convict the real assailant, Gregory Allen, after Sheriff Kasarik and Detective Couchet's ridiculously suggestive eyewitness identification process achieved its objective of having Penny Bernstein identify Stephen Avery as her attacker. It would have been nearly impossible for Vogel to bring Allen to justice. Regarding Vogel, was it possible he didn't know? The more I tried to convince myself that Vogel didn't know, the more convinced I became that he did. Then I recalled my conversation with some of the office staff a few days after the crime lab called with the DNA results. And this is the DNA results that eventually exonerated Avery. About how all three staff members who worked there at the time thought that Gregory Allen and not Stephen Avery was the assailant. They even approached Vogel with their concerns. However, he told them they were mistaken. He had checked with Allen's probation agent, who said that Allen had an airtight alibi. A statement that, like many other statements made by authorities in the first Avery case, turned out to be a big fat lie. These are not the words, nobility, of a conspiracy theorist. These are the words of the assistant district attorney for Manitowoc County at the time. So if you have the misconception that this was not deliberately done to Stephen Avery, you need to have your head examined, to quote our good friend from the video, because it is blatantly obvious and believed by the assistant district attorney of Manitowoc County that minimally Dennis Vogel, who was the DA at the time, acted with complete impropriety. He knew who did it, but went to prosecute Avery anyway. So, I've had my head examined. They couldn't find anything in there, and I can give the doctor's name if he wants to get his head examined to determine whether or not he can change his opinion regarding the 1985 case. So that's what I have to say about the 1985 case. And there's obviously a lot more, right, that we could go into, but in the interest of time, we should probably move on to other things.
Well, it was a farce for him to claim to be doing a deep dive and only do an hour and 15 minutes, because
that's his
to
show.
include everything that took place from prior to the 85 case, with him breaking into the bar and taking the cheese sandwiches and the quarters, and then the Sandra Morris incident. You can't even include the. But then again, if you listen to the audio when Colborn is running George Zipper's name, he comes back with retail theft, and what does Colborn say? Oh, that makes him a suspect right there, because you stole something from a store when you were younger. That makes you capable of being a suspect in a kidnapping.
Yeah. He does mention as well that Stephen Avery's criminal history talks about the cat and everything, which it's not even clear that Stephen did it, rather than just admitted he did it.
He didn't. It was Jerry Yonda with a Y, and it's because he was on probation and Stephen took the rap, so he wouldn't go back to jail, and he ended up getting bailed out.
But somehow Kratz's exploits are noise, but Stephen's past criminal history is relevant. So that's sort of to me that points to the bias of the law enforcement / judicial system based bias that leads him to believe that 1985 was sort of just a mistake. So that's what points to me.
David, you have anything to add?
Well, one thing, and for one, I didn't know there was homework. I did not watch this guy's video yet. But just
let me tell you something. That didn't work in grade school, and it's not going to work here.
oh, it worked for me in
Just
grade
at least
school.
say that dog ate it.
Hey, I made it through and I graduated. I can't spell that well, but
C's get degrees, baby.
no, one of the things I was going to say though, and this kind of goes back to, I got a couple of things here. One, when you were talking about the 85 case, even every one of us likes to go for the path of least resistance in our job. And even though their job is to be specific, I think the cops, when they looked at you, even with all the alibis that he had there, what's the path of least resistance? Stephen Avery. You know, it was something that
At some point,
they could make believable.
And you also got to take into consideration real quick. When they arrested him, they didn't give him his due rights to phone call or anything, and they based that on because one, his wife already knew where he was, so he didn't need to talk to her, and his majority of his alibi was his family members, so they didn't want him talking to them either.
So secondly, just, you know, for anybody to be able to summarize up this case and come to that conclusion in 15 minutes, roughly whatever he did, if you look at the hours that multiple different groups have done researching stuff on this and found more than just was out there, it's pretty naive to come out and put out a video like that. It doesn't matter how many subscribers you are. You know, I know everybody's been nice, but it seems to me like this guy is kind of, you know, made a bowl of popcorn in between watching every episode of it. And he also seems like he might be the type of guy that might be canning toilet paper for the next shortage, you know. That's just me, you know.
No, I know what you're saying, Jamie, but I do respect his background as an undercover police officer. I just think, you know, it was the lack of research that allowed him to come to this 1985 conclusion. And if you change your opinion about 1985 and say that he was completely and totally railroaded, Kasurek was in big jeopardy and Vogel was in, how much does that change the possibility in your mind that he had some compadres that were willing to drop a few things on, you know, in Steven's trailer, for example?
Yeah, you got to think, if they were willing to do it once, why wouldn't they be willing to do it twice to cover it up the wrongdoing of the first one?
That's right.
You know, because once you get a department that gets caught in something, you know, if they don't cover it up pretty quick, then guess what? Then you've got a scandal is what you've got, and nobody likes to have a scandal in their department.
Yeah, that's right. And if you look at the, you know, the top level politics that was going on at the time, you know, you usually, you know, in politics you have this fight of the, you know, the left is trying to undermine what the right is doing, and the right is simultaneously trying to undermine what the left is doing. But in this case, the left and the right were coming together and say, hey, look, Stephen Avery got screwed. What are we going to do about this? Right? And that's where the 400 grand, you know, really was coming from at the end of the day. And you know, as sort of the you know, the county level government and police level government and municipal government, that when both sides of the aisle at Capitol Hill start to, you know, come together to look negatively upon you, that the shit's about to hit the fan. And I think that's sort of you know, that was a sign that things were going very south very fast. And you know, God from heaven sent them down this case against Stephen, which really, you know, pulled their asses from the fire at a miraculous time, absolutely miraculous time.
Yeah, the 400 grand was basically hush money. Shut him up and get him locked away.
Yep.
You know, the money thing has been talked about probably since the beginning. You know, I truly, especially people who are on the guilter side of things, I don't think they're able to correlate how important that is to this case. To me, it always has been that when you have that much at stake, A lot of people are going to hide a lot of things. It still happens today.
Yeah.
I mean, governments are crooked.
Yeah, I think in addition to that money, I think you hit the nail on the head right there, Jamie, because at the end of the day, what really matters in politics is power, right?
Yep.
And when you look at what was about to happen of the the Avery investigation at the municipal government was going to be a total erosion of the power structure that had been built up by the Kasurks, by the Vogels, and that was really in addition to the money, that power structure was really going to come under close scrutiny. How did that happen? And a lot of people were going to get thumped the whack-a-mole thump. That's really that kind of power structure is really worth protecting with a few plants in my mind. And then, I'm sure he'll come on and call me a conspiracy theorist for saying that, but really that's what's at the biggest risk. Not the dollars is not that's not as significant, but the power structure of having all that power. Imagine what you can do with all that power. Just ask Dave Bogatka what you can do with all that power, right? What were the cops asking him to do? Right? Basically paying tribute as if he was Don Corleone, right?
I'm gonna give you a really good instance of when things go bad in police departments. Where I live right now, we currently have the former police chief of Milwaukee. He's now the police chief for Fargo, and he's under a lot of scrutiny because in the past month we've had 33 officers either retire or quit the department because of him. And they've had people from his past department come on in the news over here and talk about why they left or things that they found wrong in the Milwaukee department, why they left the department when he was there. There's bad people in departments. I mean, there's good people there too. We can't pin it all on just bad cops. There's good people in those departments as well, and they want to see things done right too. But you start to see a pattern though in certain people, and this is a real life scenario that's going on as of like this week. People's past follow them.
Oh yeah, look at politicians.
Another thing that's worth
As soon
talking
as somebody
about with
doesn't
regard to
agree with the politician, they start bringing up dirt on them. It's all about yeah.
So I think another thing that's worth talking about with regard to this guy's video is the things. First of all, his overall treatment of Brendan, and the things that he misconstrues about Brendan's coerced confession. I mean, you and I, Millbilly, have sat through Brendan's November 6th interview in Crivets, and by the end of that interview, right? And you can say, was he coerced in that interview or not in November 6th, right? Were they trying to get a confession out of him, or were they just trying to follow the evidence? By the end of that November 6th interview in Crivets, what's that? Remind me of the guy's name who actually did that interview, Millbilly, the cop, November 6th.
You're talking about Kim Sklarinsky from DCI.
Was he in the car with Brendan?
He's the one. He kept them coming in and out of the car,
asking the questions. But by the end of that interview, right, the Sklarinsky interview, Brendan admitted that he and Blaine had to get out of the driveway of Avery Road so Teresa Hallback could drive her RAV4 off the property. Right?
Yep.
And that's right on tape. You can go back and watch the old video, right? You can say that Brendan wasn't getting yelled at. Now this guy has the nerve to say that Brendan's IQ is so low that he can't even understand the concept of telling people what they want to hear, so they'll leave him alone. If this November 6th interview isn't just the canonical example of Brendan saying what he thinks he needs to say to get people out of his face, I don't know what is. right? That to me, that is the interview that sort of sets the table for what happens, in the late February, March timeframe, where they realize that they can get this kid to say frigging anything that they want to. Listen to before you draw any conclusions about what Brendan said. Listen to that interview, and I'll agree. The cop wasn't bullying him. He wasn't, physically. He was being, maybe mildly intimidating from Brendan's 16-year-old perspective.
Condescending for sure.
Condescending for sure. But he was, he wasn't, screaming with him, pointing his fingers. He was legitimately doing that kind of forceful cop fact finding that you were talking about. And as we know from Laura Nyrider, when you try and do this, you might call it Reed technique. People have other names for it, and I know there's other techniques as well. But when you try and do these types of forceful interviews with people of Brendan's IQ, it's not effective. And the November 6th interview is the perfect example of that. Where Brendan will just say anything to get people out of his face, and so he draws the fact that there's some truth in Brendan's confessions, and he very much misconstrues. I don't know whether this is by accident or on purpose, sort of the order of events that happened. I mean, Brenda's confession was in March, right? The crime and all the interviews and the evidence was collected obviously in early November after the crime on October 31st. So when he starts to talk about things like, the bones were found in the fire pit, just like Brendan's confession. Well, Brendan's confession was in March, and the bones were found, back 5 months ago in November, right? November, December, January, February, March, right? 5 months ago, So that was already known. So Brendan confessing to facts that he already knows is the whole. So there's a whole bunch of things that he says with regard to Brendan's confession, and item FL, and FL is, if truth be told, this video probably see me talk about it enough times. For me, item FL was my personal. My personal sort of thing that I looked at that turned me from being somebody who was willing to go either way on this case when I first started looking at it, to say there's no way FL was planted, and if FL was planted, the rest of it is probably planted too. Brendan, as they're leading him through this false confession, says, who shot her in the head? He did. Well, it went on there. Where did he shoot her in the head? Where did this take place? And what does Brendan say? Outside.
And why is that a problem? There's about 6 inches of snow outside.
As is evidenced by the video, right? There's a video of them walking into the garage.
While they're interviewing Brendan, a detective for Calumet County, Wendy Baldwin, goes to the Avery property while all the other officers are at the Hickory Hills evidence storage with all the evidence. She goes there by herself. It's documented in the logs we have. Why did she go there? And then we have Mark Weger getting phone calls during the interview. They obviously went and checked what evidence they had.
Well, why did we get in Fassbender when Brendan said this happened outside? Say, no, Brendan, you're lying to us. We can't believe that. Why did they say that? What evidence did they have that was a lie? They didn't. And the answer is, obviously, they didn't have any evidence. They needed Brendan to say something else because they needed to go into the garage because of their failing case against Stephen. Stephen was this close to the property bond, right? And what happened was, right, they get Brendan to say, oh, this happened inside the garage. Oh, the garage, we need a search warrant, right? So
you look at it, everybody they talked to that would have helped Stephen, They try to twist around their interviews and try to get them to say something negative about them. I mean, they tried to bring any more charges they could against him so they could raise the bail even higher.
It's part of that.
And they succeeded in that, right?
It was partly that, but it was also not only the bail, but they were trying to just get something to stick. They needed anything to stick.
Yeah. Well, they got the bail up high, right? So Stephen did not get a bond because the amount of money that they got for a bond on the property was not sufficient to cover the bail. After Brendan's charges to Stephen and the 3 charges that they added up the bail, and those 3 charges later, all 3 of them got dropped because of lack of evidence. So that is my Brendan was, in my mind, Brendan was just a victim of the state's failing case against Stephen. So but it continues, right? They say to Brendan, no, this is a lie, right? And they get the search warrant. Now in the video of question here, he also claims that Brendan is the first one to bring up that Stephen goes under the hood. And a lot of people don't realize this, but the hood latch swab, right, that contains the inordinate amount of DNA that Zellner has asked why this is so high, that wasn't brought up by Brendan first.
Fassbender.
I got news for you, pal. That is not the order of which it happened. They asked him, just like they asked him, who shot her in the head. They also asked him what was he doing under the hood. Brendan did not think of this. This is something that they brought up first. So again, after this miraculous interview, after this, if you look, if you were to go into the, if you guys have the interview handy, I know our timestamps are off, but somewhere around 45 minutes into the interview, he says, well, you needed an 8-day search warrant because they did a meticulous search. Meticulous. And he uses that word twice in his video. Meticulous.
Well,
somehow
backstory.
It wasn't meticulous enough to find FL, was it?
I don't think he knows how to pronounce ridiculous.
But the initial search warrant was only for a few days. They were on the morning of the 7th. They're talking about wrapping up the investigation and walking away. Well, the events of November 7th happen, and then they reapply for a search warrant to keep the property for a few more days. And what do you know? They then start finding things.
Yeah, November 8th is the key, right?
One thing, I've been hearing that this guy is supposedly an ex-detective in a drug task force. One of the things that I would like to ask him, if he was to ever be on a live with somebody else, is look at the Veely CD, and that was hidden in a personal safe of
safekeeping or something.
Yeah.
Fassbender.
Yeah, I think it was Fassbender. Would he think that that's okay in a case like this?
Would he think it's odd? The first question I'd ask him is, does he think it's odd?
Yeah.
And then I'd ask him if it's okay.
But I would assume though too, being and somebody had said he was in a drug task force. Drug task force probably get into doing some shady tactics when they're undercover to get whoever they're going for.
That's one of the points he makes in his video. He says that there was an instance where he was sending people in to do drug buys, and he sent his informant in there. They made it the buy, and they stated to him that, oh yeah, the drugs are in there. And they went in there and they searched everywhere, couldn't find anything. And then he applied for another search warrant, went back and looked, and he found it after another search. But
in a strange place. Yeah.
It's different when it's a drug case to a murder case.
Yeah, and if you look at what Coburn said he was looking for when he went in to search the that little cabinet, the objective of that search warrant was not the key. So they didn't even find what they what they said they were looking for, but this key miraculously shows up. So it's like you said, it's just much different. He went in for drugs. I'm sure he put in the search warrant that he was looking for drugs, and in the second search he found the exact drugs he was looking for. Coburn went in looking for pornography, but look what he pulls out of his ass. Not Mark something, Coburn, the same guy, by the way, the same guy. In case anybody happens to watch this video, who was looking at the case, the same guy who took the call from Brown County where Gregory Allen said, yeah, you know what? Someone is in jail in Manitowoc for a crime that I committed against this woman, Penny Bernstein.
Yep. That was one of the comments I left on the
I
video.
did that.
I said, is it common police protocol to file reports months and years after they happen? Like, for instance, Stephen Avery's released on the 11th, and the 12th he files a report about that Brown County call. Just like he doesn't file his report about talking to Stephen Avery on November 3rd until 8 months later when Manitowoc does their summary report.
So the same
and
guy
not
who
to
took
mention,
the call,
Colborn is the very
found the
first
key.
officer contacted in Manitowoc by Calumet. Just so happens that he just did a deposition on Stephen Avery's lawsuit. And who do you think he called first? James Link.
James Link. I knew that. And who's the guy who didn't sign in to the garage search that brought everybody sandwiches?
Well,
James Link.
That's another thing. Fassbender wrote that Remaker was present when they went and did a search on his trailer. You read the pretrial transcripts, and Remaker states that, no, that wasn't me.
Must have been Jared, the Subway guy that brought the sandwiches.
The pedophile.
Yeah.
He'd be a perfect one to be hired by Manitowoc or
Yeah.
Calumet.
But
So-
I don't know. I think we
it
should
continues.
probably get together and just start from the beginning. I mean, there's no way we could do this whole case in one sitting, 2 sittings, 4 sittings, 5 sittings. You have to take it piece by piece.
Yeah, I agree. I think, but with regard to the video, I agree with Mark Hodnott that it probably would be, from the perspective of people who have looked at the case and finds that Stephen is really innocent and what happened to Brendan is a complete atrocity. It would be good to have multiple points of view with him. Him as a mediator. I think with him as a mediator, we would get to things like, the fact that there was no odor detected by anybody who was there, despite Robert Fabian, who has the smell senses of a polar bear, who could smell meat 5 miles away, and the fact that there's no blood spatter in the garage, despite shot 15 times or 10 to 15 times. I'd love to have those police instincts say, oh, you know what? If we really can't find that evidence, then this other evidence, how do you explain it? How do you explain the collection of FL after this meticulous search and lack of blood spatter? It's just odd. It's just odd. So
my final conclusion is you can't call this a deep dive when you don't know nothing.
Yeah, it's a show. I would say that we had to look at this for 15, 20 hours anyway to be able to summarize it at that level. That's a commitment of time. Maybe he's running a YouTube channel. I don't know how much money he makes on YouTube. Or I see that he's written a couple of books. If you look at the background on his video, you see a couple of books. I think his opinion as a police officer is undercover. And his instinct should be respected. I think he came to the wrong conclusions here and has
you can only talk about what you know. I don't talk about what I don't know.
Yeah.
If I don't know, I tell you I don't know.
That would preclude me from talking about women.
I will. But I want to thank you both and Mark for coming on. We'll see you guys next time.
Take care, Billy. Take care, everybody.